You know what? Polly is just happy that we're starting chapter 3. The transport layer. We were at the application layer that's actually higher up. Transport layer, we're getting closer to the heart of the internet. So in the transport layer service, there are a number of important functionalities. Multiplexing, demultiplexing, reliable data transfer, flow control, and congestion control. Now each of these are important, but multiplexing, demultiplexing, flow control, these two are super simple. They'll be done in like one slide or a couple slides. Now, what's going to take us quite amount of time is this. Reliable data transfer. And then slightly less, congestion control. All right. And both of these functions are implemented in TCP. Reliable transport, congestion control. Now then you can imagine UDP being very simple, right? It's a connectionless transport layer service versus TCP being connection-oriented. So in UDP, you don't need to set up something ahead of time before we send data. But TCP, you need to have a setup process before we begin to send data packets. 3.1 is the overview section. So what I need to say here is this. The transport layer services is actually providing a logical communication channel between the two processes that are running on different end systems. All right. So there's a sender side of the process, a sender side of the transport layer protocol, and there's also the receiver side of the transport layer protocol. And the functions is often corresponding each other. Sender side would take messages from the application layer and break it into a number of these smaller segments. And these segments will be passed down further to the network layer. Receiver side is going to take segments from the network layer, reassemble them back to the original message, and that message gets passed up to the application layer. That's when, if this guy here sends an HTTP request, this guy over here receives the HTTP request. So the web server here can begin parsing the HTTP request and then find out what is the object being requested. Right? So this is the very basic function of the transport layer protocols. Take messages from application, break it into segments, reassemble segments into message, and pass it back up to the application layer receiver. Now, that breaking of the segments, passing of the segments, and reassembling of the segments are implemented in two different flavors, TCP versus UDP. One is reliable, the other is not. Transport layer versus network layer services. So transport layer there works closely with the application layer. It works also closely with the network layer. But we have not yet talked about network layer functionalities much, so let me just, break it to you. What is the main role of these network layer protocols? So what they do is to provide communication between hosts. So meaning enabling sending of messages, sending of packets, or sending of segments through the internet and reaching the other host, the destination, from source host to destination host. Okay, so that is the purpose of network layer protocols. Transport layer, however, is just to establish a logical communication between processes. All right? So between two hosts, there are often multiple processes running. So transport layer handles a pair of processes at a time. All right? So a pair of processes, and network layer handles a pair of hosts. The granularity, okay, of the channel, the entities of the channel are very different. So transport layer here rely on underlying network layer service. So if there's a process needing to send certain segments to another process, hey, how does the sending process know which way to pass it down further? Because internet is huge and in the middle. That is the network layer protocol's job. So logical connection between the sending transport layer and the receiving transport layer That is kind of abstract. That's why I keep saying that it's a logical communication, because the network layer is going to handle and find a clear path between the two of them. All right. Now, let me try to use an analogy to explain so that it's more clear the distinction between a transport layer service to a network layer service. So the example is this. Anne here has 12 kids in the house, and Bill has also 12 kids in the house. Yeah, both big families. And for some reason, Anne's kids and Bill's kids are good friends to each other, right? So houses there, Anne's house and Bill's house, consider them as hosts. And each kid's generating letters sending to each other will be the processes. So 12 processes generating messages independently. Okay, and trying to send them to Bill's houses and therefore reaching Bill's kids. So each letter generated by each kid is an application message. Anne and Bill will then be the transport layer service. So Anne here is the sending side of the transport layer service, taking all the envelopes and then drop it into the mailbox. So it's mixing all the envelopes into the mailbox. Bill, on the other hand, will take all the letters out of the mailbox and distribute each envelope to the destination processes, to each of the kids, right? So Bill there is demultiplexing the envelopes from the mailbox, and Anne there is multiplexing, okay, the envelopes into the mailbox. Now, the mailman, okay, taking all these envelopes from Anne's box and then go all the way to Bill's mailbox is the network layer protocol. All right, so mailman is the real person there needing to find a way and driving all the way to send all these messages. And there are two services again. TCP here does reliable transfer, but it actually does more. Packets are going to arrive in order. All right? Packets, as they get sent, they will also be controlled. So sometimes you can send faster, but sometimes slower. And usually it's when there's congestion, then you send slower. If there's not congestion, TCP sender side will be sending more aggressively. There's also flow control, connection setup. Flow control is such that we do not overwhelm the receiver side buffer. Okay. Connection setup is, if you heard, TCP is a connection-oriented services as well. In order to provide these functionality, reliable transfer, in-order delivery, congestion control, and flow control, well, the sender and the receiver side of a TCP connection needs to, communicate a little bit more before setting up a connection. Right? So that takes some time. So there's a connection setup process as well. UDP, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. It's not reliable. It does not guarantee ordered delivery. So UDP is essentially nothing versus TCP does a lot. So essentially at the transport layer, you have the two extremes of the services. Okay. So it's on top of the network layer, which is called the IP protocol, and it's best effort, meaning do nothing. All right, so no field extension of IP. And so UDP there is very simplistic. Take messages from application, break them into segments, pass it out. Receiver there, grab the segments from network layer, and then try to reassemble them back to the original message and pass it up to the application layer. Now, if there's any segment lost in the middle, that message gets passed up to the receiver side of the application layer protocol. It's not going to make too much sense, all right? Oh, and TCP, UDP, one does reliable transfer congestion control, the other does nothing. None of them provide this delay guarantee, bandwidth guarantee, and none of them provide security guarantee. Okay, and you heard it earlier, the security is provided by this alternative service, but this alternative service is in fact implemented in the what? Application layer.